Good morning, members, officers, and any members of the public who are viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins. I'm the chair of this committee. My vice chair is Councillor Peter Sanford. I'll introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that this meeting is being live streamed. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera and microphone remain off unless you're addressing the committee. If you're present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Ian, do we have any apologies for absence today, please?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Helen Leeming and Councillor John Williams. And as you heard earlier, Councillor Mark Howell will be a little bit late.
Thank you. I think we are nevertheless quorate, so I suggest we proceed. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in relation to any item of business on this agenda? If an interest subsequently becomes apparent, please raise it at that point. I'll start with Councillor Stobart and then Councillor Stanford.
Chair, I would just like to remind the committee that I'm a board member of South Cambridge Investment Partnership, which is sometimes known as SKIP, which gets a couple of mentions in the later part of the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that I'm a Director of Ermine Street Housing. You can probably copy and paste the declaration from previous minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. As others probably can copy and paste from previous meetings, but I'm a member of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Assembly and it is referenced in 3 points of the report.
Thank you. Just realised I can just call you Councillor Williams today. That makes a nice change. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Do members have any suggested amendments relating to the accuracy of the minutes for the meeting held on the 16th of July? Councillor Williams.
Feels strange being called just Councillor Williams. It just makes me think of my mother-in-law. But yes, I wasn't present at the meeting, so I'll abstain from the minutes, Chair.
That's no problem at all. I'm always happy to be compared to people's mothers-in-law. That's what I seek to achieve in my life. So I'd like to move approval of these minutes as a true and accurate record. Is someone happy to second that? Thank you. Any dissent? Noting Councillor Williams's abstention. Nope, thank you very much. I think that's all approved. Item 4 is public questions. No questions have been received for this meeting. So we come to the first substantive item 5, the internal audit plan and opinion. We are invited to consider the internal audit plan and opinion. Can I ask Mr. Tully to please present his report? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and good morning to all members of the committee. So as a very brief summary, the purpose of this report is really to communicate the next 6 months of work, also feedback on what we've been doing over the previous 6 months, and that's to provide a current opinion on the control environment. What I'm also presenting to you today as part of the appendices is the Charter and the Code of Ethics. Although there's been no significant changes to these, I like to take these back to the committee at least once per year to basically get your support for the year ahead, and also good in sort of like demonstrating how we're complying with audit standards. There are a few minor changes. You've seen we've used track changes to highlight those, nothing too exciting. So just moving into the report in your agenda pack today, starting off on sort of page 12. Part of the background, we present a 6-month plan as a rule, but we also come back to you as a committee on at least a quarterly basis. The key point here is that our plan's continually updated. It's really important that we are agile and can respond to demands. A lot of the report is quite similar to usual, but before we go into it, I just want to highlight also on page 12 in paragraph 17, standards. It's worth being aware that new global internal audit standards were issued earlier in the year. In the local government sector, we have to comply with public sector internal audit standards, which are based upon those. We are expecting them to be issued shortly. There's going to be consultation with the ISA-AB and CIPFA, so these are sort of regulatory bodies. We've been preparing for these as much as we can, but obviously they're not finalised. Also, at Cambridge City Council, because we're a shared service, there are sort of changes going on there, transformation. We're not expecting major big changes there for internal audits, but it's just worth being aware that because of both these things, we might need to bring back another version of the Charter to you at a later date just to reflect those changes. So if they're big, material, important ones, I'll keep the committee informed. So moving into the actual report pack, on page 17, this is an Appendix A with a plan. I'd like to start off by talking about the various different assurance types to explain how we sort of like do our auditing. And I'd like to present key themes. We group our audits by different themes. And I think probably the main one at the top of the list there is probably regulation and safety, possibly the main theme reflecting that we're doing a lot of work with colleagues in housing. Although some of you will be quite seasoned to this, it's probably worth identifying that in page 19 in section 4, we talk about how we identify our work plan, all the different sources of intelligence, how we work with the risk register and colleagues, and that of course includes members of the committee. Moving forwards, probably the meaty bit is into section 9 on page 21, where we've got a forward plan. And we provide examples of the various different categories of work that we provide as a starter for 10. What you may notice if you've read a few of these reports before, it used to be spread over quite a lot of the reports, and it was quite lengthy. So I've taken the opportunity just to try and consolidate that, and hopefully for members of the committee, it's a little bit easier to digest now. So hopefully you'll welcome that. But following on from that, we have on page 22, we have sort of indicative allocation of how resources are split across the different activity types. I think it's helpful to communicate this because as part of auditing standards, we don't just present in our plan what we'd call regular audits. We also do sort of advisory consultancy work in different areas. And it's important that we make the committee of how that work is split up. And it's also helpful, I think, just for you to see a trend about how that sort of work changes from year to year. I think I've put some summary observations to that effect on page 22 and page 23. The one that I would highlight from you there is that I say there's probably a similar resource demand in governance, risk and control, but most of the work within that category is ad hoc. So for example, we're doing the National Fraud Initiative exercise at the moment. It's a fairly big piece of work that happens on a 2-yearly basis. Of course, we've got the new public sector internal audit standards coming in, which I just mentioned. It's going to take a bit of work to make sure that we're meeting the new standards. We're doing a big 5-yearly review of the Code of Governance. We review it regularly and update it in real time, but it's good to take a nice healthy check with that on a 5-year basis. And that's linking into some sort of guidance which is coming out from various different bodies around assurance mapping. So it's all going to be very well timed there. Looking into sort of like the more traditional audits, we've got those listed on page 24. So starting in paragraph section 9.4 of your packs, we kick off with the risk-based work. So this is the stuff that we'd like to look at based on our risk determination of what we think would add the most value. And then moving on to the following section, that's our core assurance work on page 25. These are things that we often have to do because there's perhaps a legislative requirement, or examples could be doing grant certification returns because that's part of the standards and requirements to get the money, the internal audit provide assurance. So we break our work for regular audits down into those two areas. Moving on, Appendix B of the packs, this is the progress updates. So the key thing to highlight there is the opinion, my opinion, on page 29, section 3. Overall, reasonable assurance on the control environment, same as before the previous reports. Progress against the plan on page 31, paragraph 6, highlighting reviews we've done over the past 12-month period. What I would stress for the committee is that we do, of course, report regularly the audit opinion to you in our quarterly reports, plus the work we're doing, which, although it makes very good sense, and it's something I know the committee values, perhaps still quite innovative in a few local government circles. So it's perhaps a little bit of repetition as part of reports, but it's good, and hopefully it makes our colleagues, external auditors and you, quite aware of what we've done over the past year. So I hope you find that useful as well. I would then draw your attention to page 32, section 7, the National Fraud Initiative. It is a big piece of work that we're doing. It's data analytics. Purpose is to basically identify cases of fraud and error. It's almost an ongoing process, but it's a big 2-yearly data extract, which is what's happening at the moment. So we're extracting data from systems, We're also quality assuring that data before we load it up to the Cabinet Office. So that's a really good health and checkpoint to make sure that the data sets are good quality, and we're providing feedback to the teams on that. And that'll be a great opportunity if they need to make any improvements, although as they've been doing it for a few years now, I'm not expecting any problems. Professional developments on page 33. I briefly introduced it, but this is where I go into more detail if you want to have a look on section 8.2 about the new global internal audit standards. The expected compliance for the public sector is April 2025. So as I say, we have started very much preparing for that based on what we know. On page 34, we have other activities. It is important that we reflect this in our internal audit plan for transparency. And the two big thematic areas that I highlight here is that we champion good practice and governance and risk. We very much help support the development of the governance framework, and you see us bring the annual governance statement to you as a committee. We also work strongly with colleagues in policy and performance team, developing good practice and risk management. And of course, our audits might identify potential risks to add to team risk registers. That then takes us on to the final two appendices, which, as you've probably seen many times, I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to go through those. Appendix C is our charter. The minor changes really are highlighted using track changes, hopefully make it easy for you to see at a glance. Basically, change of team names, reflecting our change of external auditors. And then we have the Code of Ethics, no change there, that's the same as previous years. And then we finalise off with Appendix E, our glossary of terms, because we do use a lot of technical jargon, and so hopefully you find that a useful reference point. So thank you, that's my introduction report, but I have to have discussion, comments and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Are there any comments or questions from members of the committee? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 24, you referenced, Mr. Tully, about the learning and development. I take it that also means one of the things that I raised previously was making sure about CPD for people that actually we rely on their qualifications and they have that qualification to get the job, and how do we ensure that they still have those qualifications? And that was something that was sort of, it slipped through the net, as it were. So is that included in this, or is this about training, ongoing training for just staff in general, or is this actually a monitoring approach to ensure, because obviously CPD is something that wouldn't necessarily be done, it's got to be done through their professional bodies as opposed to the council. That's my first question, Chair. Happy to come back afterwards, or if you want me to carry on, I'll carry on. Okay, so that's page 24. Then on page 31, I was just having a look at some of, I appreciate we've only got the asset register, which, and we'll see from later on from the external auditors that the asset register is something that they want us to, so that seems quite sensible. On the procurement, the declarations of interest, we've got that at a 2 on the medium. Is there something in particular which means that it's sort of moving away from the more lower, because normally people would, officers and councillors are expected to declare their interest, and therefore I wouldn't see it as such a high risk, or is it because people, we've found out people aren't declaring them, or so forth? And on taxi licensing, just to give a bit more around the reassurance on that with the medium too, as to why that is, because taxi licensing, one of the most humbling things actually as a councillor to do is to sit on a licensing panel because you have public safety is your first and only job when you're deciding if someone has a licence or not. So some reassurance around that. And finally, something that's in EY's report, it says that they've identified one significant risk. Is there any works being done through internal audit to try and rectify that risk?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Mr. Tully, do you want to pick up on any of those points?
Yes, thank you for your questions. A lot of questions there, so if I do miss out on any elements of it, we can pick that up again for sure. So the first one was looking at actually the forward plan of work, and just to give you assurance, this was the learning development. This was the activity that was requested via this committee earlier. So just to give you assurance on that's the scope. The next questions were with regards to existing work which has been completed. which we have reported back to this committee and discussed before. I think you highlighted both taxi licensing and also procurement declarations of interest. So the procurement declarations of interest, we didn't highlight any specific areas of non-compliance, and we provided assurance to the committee on that before. This was more about trying to identify opportunities for recording it in a smarter fashion and more systems-based, really. So that's why we managed to give that reasonable assurance. It wasn't really non-compliance there. It was just definitely a smarter way of doing it. The taxi licensing implementation, again, this was a reactive bit of work, highlighting that new sort of legislation had come in, talking about how data is recorded, and that allows a sort of national portal where data can be shared. So we wanted to make sure that we were complying with that as a council. And, you know, by and large we were, but we just identified a couple of processing system improvements. So that, again, that's why just 2 medium recommendations there. It was by and large compliant there. Now, you highlighted a risk in the EY report. I'd be grateful if you could expand upon that and say which was the specific risk that you wanted to discuss, and then I can perhaps answer that with clarity.
Councillor Williams?
Yes, so I'll just, if I move on to, in agenda item 6, it says in the EY report, if I take you to page 57 of our report, on governance, it says that 1 significant risk was identified and 1 significant weakness identified. On page 57, it then goes on to more detail later on in the report. They identified a significant weakness in the council's arrangements, and that will be reporting by exception in relation to governance.
So I think I'm right in saying that that significant risk is the delays to published and audited accounts.
But is the fact we've caught up, and it's still being referenced, they say that we've caught up, but they're still seeing a risk, and also in the report there's things in relation to resources and everything else. Is that something that something that internal audit, as it is still being raised as a risk, will be looking into and having a work programme on?
So I think just to clarify, so the significant risk is in relation to the years 21, 22 and 22, 23, which although the accounts have been prepared, we haven't achieved sign-off yet because we haven't, I mean, we'll discuss in a bit later with Mr. Russell. So yes, we have in some sense caught up, but obviously stuff hasn't been signed on the dotted line, I think because we're awaiting further instruction from government.
If you read the text of the report, Chair, and I would be interested on internal, whether they are or are not looking into this, it does still flesh out concerns in relation to risk registers and others, and about resources, and that is in the body of the text. So is that something that internal audit will be looking at? I mean, it's a yes or a no answer, really.
Well, a short answer is, in terms of yes or no, is no, we don't have it in the plan, as you can see. But as a longer-term answer, you know, there's other things outside of the audit which we're getting assurance from. I know from colleagues that it features on the risk register about, you know, getting it up to speed with the statement of accounts. And as I mentioned earlier on, you know, I have regular dialogue with colleagues in policy and performance who manage that register, also members of the leadership team, and work closely with Peter as well. So although not a specific audit, I am getting sources of assurance from other areas that risk is being managed.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Tully.
Thank you. I'll come to Councillor Redrup and then Councillor Stokebart.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the safety audits on the HRA accounts. So you've mentioned fire, damp and mould, electricity, and obviously these are incredibly important. I just wondered about the processes involved. Are they sort of a desk-based exercise, or are you sending people out to look at houses? Are you talking to residents? So I'd just be grateful for some information on the process. Thank you.
Yeah, a good question, because as internal auditors, we tend to be people who are not specialists in particular areas. So we're not the people actually going out there and doing the inspections. The council will actually have people to do that. What our role is making sure that process is happening satisfactorily. And it's something that's come under sort of a lot of important focus, because in addition to, of course, the ethical responsibility that we have, we've got a new regulator in the public sector looking at housing now. So that's brought in additional things around the reporting and the statistics of that. So we've already done a review around that, how the council coped with that new requirements, and that came out as very positive assurance. But it certainly highlights, we're going in there perhaps with more frequency now than we used to, just to provide the assurance that it's still being managed okay. And of course, damp and mould is sort of a relatively newer topical risk. It's always been around, of course, as a hazard, but certainly in the way that it needs to be managed. So that's why that component features on the plan as well.
Thank you. Mr. Maddock, you wanted to come in on that as well.
Certainly, if you wanted any more detail around what our housing department are doing, we can certainly get that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
speak to our colleagues in housing. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any further comments or questions?
No, but I would be grateful for extra
Yeah, certainly we
information.
can do
Thank
that.
you.
I'll make a note.
Yeah, thank you. That would be appreciated. Sorry, Councillor Williams, yes?
Thanks, Chair. Just to be of help, the surveys that were done, there was a report that come through, I believe, Scrutiny and Cabinet, where people actually, the surveys were done in person, and that actually gives quite a detailed response. That might be something that's worth circulating to Councillor Redrup, because it really breaks down sort of the scale of the issue for our council properties. But that happened outside of audit and has gone through that process, but you might find that of use.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Stobart, I believe we were coming to you next.
Chair, thank you. So these are quite general questions, but pertinent to this this report. I was wondering about risk around new things, and I think Jonathan did mention, for example, appearance, although it's not a new thing, but the implications, for example, of black mould in buildings was relatively recently elevated to very high status. So it's my first question. Things that appear, in a sense, out of the blue and could be the result of new legislation, new national legislation, a new requirement. How is that anticipated? And then I've got a second question, which is maybe not possible to get a perception in the longer term, but as things crop up like that, which make new demands on skills and numbers of people, hours available for the audit process, how is that managed? How is the pressure on staff managed? And if I could ask a third one, taking a kind of historical view, there'll be a recommendation and action from an audit process. How is that monitored? Do we rely on a kind of regular update, or is there a second cycle of investigation to check that that action has been completed? So three things: dealing with new stuff and its implications, the skills demands, and how are those being met through recruitment or training, and then in the longer term, how do we check that we've achieved what we set out to achieve?
Thank you. Mr. Tunning?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, all good questions. So the new changes and how it is anticipated. Yeah, we do horizon scanning, and we try and draw intelligence from lots of different sources. At its purest level, in the world of internal auditing, if you do things by the book, you'd be doing risk-based auditing, looking at the strategic risk register of the organisation. And we do that, but we also supplement it with our own sort of data and intelligence as well. So we look at lots of different places, and that could be chatting to colleagues, peer networks, it could be looking at professional journals, looking at what's coming out of the legislation. And then that, of course, is a big one. And you hope with the legislation that there'll be a sufficient lead-up time that you can start to prepare for that. But sometimes it does happen at very short notice. And of course, with the change in government recently, sort of anticipating lots of things to come over the horizon, which we'll need to respond to. So it's something that we keep a constant eye on, and that's why our plan has to be agile, really. Now, the effect of that on demand pressure for the team is that, by keeping an eye on it, our audit plan flexes. So if something's more higher priority than a previous item that's in the plan, that item will be lowered down in terms of priority, and it will be picked up at a later date. That's the simple way of doing with it. And we manage that within our sort of capacity at the team. Of course, there is potential that, you know, the demand on internal audit could come so high at another point. We might need to increase team resources. So we do supplement what we do in the team with basically we've got agency workers as well, potentially. We've got some recruitment this afternoon. So we've got ways of bringing extra resource into the team if needed. And there's very much a link to skills around that and how we're prepared to audit these things, because we can't be experts at everything. I wish we could. And so we have to try and make sure we keep up to date with our training as much as possible. Again, all members of the team are professionally qualified. We're members of professional networks. We stay up to date with what our organisations are telling us is good practice, and other organisations as well. And we'll go on training as required. So, for example, the team's attending some conference training next week with the Institute of Internal Auditors. That's a great focal point to bring lots of topical issues together. It can be a mix of private sector and public sector training, but you're still good learning from the private sector as well. So that helps us stay on top of these topical issues, but it is definitely a challenge that we have to keep an eye on. And then the historical review process around actions. Well, I do include that earlier on in the section reports. It's a brief line, but you're right, it's a very important one. If we make actions, we agree them with management, and we do follow those up. The approach to follow up depends upon the severity and the impact of that action. If it was a report that was sort of limited assurance and wasn't performing very well, what we would do is we would come back and probably give that a full audit to be very, very thorough. If it was just minor actions, we'd follow that appropriately just by looking at the actions. And if they're really, really low tariff actions, things of no importance, you know, gold-plated, it'd be great if you could do this. We might just leave those to management to sort of like deliver those at their own sort of pace. But yeah, we very much keep an eye on the actions that we've made, because it's important to make sure the controls improve as needed.
Thank you. Councillor Stobart, did you have any further questions or comments?
Just one brief one, and Jonathan, I've often spoken about data and that being, in a sense, a rising tide on which we're all kind of riding. We need both access to data and a way of analysing it, and sometimes quite acutely. Data scientists are thin on the ground, and this kind of poses one of the skills challenges. It's really a comment rather than a question, but maybe you could counter with a comment, Jonathan, on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Data analytics is something that's very important to me and the team, and to try and leverage that as much as we can, because it potentially gives us better insights. So there may be opportunities where we could do whole system testing rather than sample-based testing, and also potential opportunities to try and be a little bit more efficient with the way that we do data. So it's important that the team are trying to exploit that as much as we can. I know that both my council, both South County and Cambridge, are actually sort of like investing in sort of like data business analysts. It might not be the exact job title, but I've got a network with them as well, so we can sort of like pull upon their skill and resources. So yeah, we're keen to just try and leverage that as much as we can.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the committee? Thank you. So just one comment from myself, if I may. I think a little later in the meeting today, we're going to be considering some sort of emerging recommendations from KPMG as they've started their audit work. Can you kind of carve out a bit of space in the kind of forthcoming audit plan just to follow up on some of those recommendations? I mean, I think we'll discuss it more, but I would anticipate particularly around the kind of accounts payable and kind of regular reconciliation side of things, whether your team could provide some assurance in those areas in the coming months. Do you think that could be possible?
Yeah, I can definitely take that on board. I've already started having dialogue with colleagues at KPMG, had a meeting with them this week, and we've got hopefully some regular sort of catch-ups in the diary now moving forwards. So yeah, I think we can definitely try and do something with that.
Thank you. I think the committee would appreciate that assurance. So, sorry, unless anybody particularly objects to me sort of commissioning that piece of work. Good. Okay. So we've been asked to consider the supporting information and approve the draft audit plan and strategy, and approve the supporting charter and code of ethics. We happy to take that by affirmation? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tully, for presenting today. Item 6 is the value for money report for 2021-22 and 2022-23 from Ernst & Young. I believe we're joined remotely by Mr. Russell and Ms. Dawson. Would one of you please present the report? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the report is, as already discussed in the meeting, it covers our VFM responsibilities, VFM arrangements responsibilities for the open years of accounts of 21-22 and 22-23. And it sets out our assessment of those arrangements against the 3 criteria that are set out on your page 57. So across financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And the work that we've done is to look back through our own records of working with you in that period, your minutes, key decisions, arrangements, governance arrangements that were in place, your approach to your financial planning, budgeting and management, and also key decisions that you've taken through that period, how those have been done, whether the correct people have been involved, and how you've used information in to support that decision making. So what we don't do is provide you with an opinion on whether or not you've achieved value for money. I know we've rehearsed that a number of times in this committee before, but what we do is provide you with a view as to whether or not your arrangements are sufficient to achieve value for money. And as you'll note on page 57, we identified a significant risk to your arrangements around governance, which was associated with the financial reporting responsibilities of the organisation and the arrangements in place to achieve that. And we did note that in the periods of 21-22 and 22-23, the significant significant weakness rather, that we had identified in prior years still existed, albeit that improvements were being made. You know, there was still a significant weakness in those arrangements during those 2 periods. So that is the conclusion that we have arrived at for the period up to 31st March 2023. The reason for bringing this report to you is that it will then come into our final opinions on both of those financial years under the new arrangements that the Ministry has put in place for disclaimed opinions for significantly delayed audits. So as we hit the backstop date, which they have put into legislation, which is the 13th of December this year, so we'll then issue a disclaimed audit opinion on those open years of accounts and also our conclusion on your value for money arrangements. So this is the bit that provides you with that background as to what supports that VFM arrangements opinion. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Could you, I'm at risk of running slightly into the next item here, but I wonder if this would also be an appropriate moment just for you to update the committee on what has changed since we last met in July as to the arrangements for this to get us from where we are now to a point of having something to sign.
Yeah. So what has changed since is that after a very long period of discussion and debate as to quite how to achieve a clear through of the delayed audits, the minister who came in with the new government took a decision and announced that at the end of July that he would put into force backstop dates, and he also set out what those backstop dates would be for all the years up to 31st March 2023, and actually has laid legislation that comes into force on Monday that does away with the previous reporting deadline, reporting target dates of the 30th of September each year for financial statements, and actually puts into place this backstop date. So that's the 13th of December for any year up to 31st of March 2023 that's open. And then from there, so for 23-24, the backstop date is 28th of February. And then from then on, they roll forward for subsequent financial years. And the underlying objective of that is to try to prevent a situation where delayed audits, a backlog builds up again by putting in that curtailment date. The NAO's Code of Audit Practice has also been changed slightly to allow for those backstop dates to be more effective in terms of the amount of work required from auditors. And the main change there is that they have reduced the requirement on value for money reporting. But you'll note that we've actually completed all of that fully for the open years of account. And then the NAO have also issued, or are in the process of issuing, guidance which will allow, which in line with the Financial Reporting Council, really sets the expectation of how auditors should undertake a disclaimed opinion, and then how they should go forward to rebuild assurance from 23-24. So that second part is really for KPMG in your particular circumstance. But a lot of work has gone on. A lot of guidance has now come out, or is due to come out. The legislation is, as I say, due to come into force. The arrangements that we have in place are that we have a team working in the background who have made a number of requests to Peter and his team in terms of information about the statement of accounts, when you're going to approve them as a council, what we will need from you in terms of updated information. And we are working through that in the background with a view that subject to you formally approving your open years of accounts before the 13th of December, we will then be in a position to provide you with a disclaimed opinion, and you'll then be able to publish that by the backstop date and avoid being on any lists that MHCLG publish of organisations that have failed to meet that backstop date. So we're organised in the background and working closely with Peter and his team to get that done.
Thank you. My understanding was that those 2 years have already been signed off by this committee. Is that not correct? Have we not approved the draft?
I'll refer to that in my next report. But
okay.
They'll have to come, sorry. So the accounts will have to come back to this committee for final approval once EY have done what they need to. And actually the 5th of December would probably work quite well, given that that's the next date.
Thank you. So, I mean, as we sit here now, is there anything you're aware of, Ms. Dawson, that suggests that we won't be able to meet that 5th of December date?
I'm not aware of anything at the moment. I just refer to Mark. We're not. I think we're all in train, aren't we, Mark? We've got the information coming through.
Yeah, great. So the request, as Janet referred to, have been to Peter. Some of the information has been received that we needed by the date we need to. And as Janet says, we're now working through with all the other audits, clearly, that we're looking, that are in the same position as South Cams. So there's nothing at the moment that would prevent us at the moment. Obviously, caveat as always, but we don't see any reason why it should be an issue to get across the line before that backstop date.
Thank you. I think perhaps we should schedule a meeting. I mean, I'm slightly in your hands, but I would suggest maybe early November, perhaps for Mr. Maddock, myself, and some representatives from Ernst & Young, just to check on progress, because I don't want to get closer to December and have any surprises. It sounds like it should be, he said, tapping wood, relatively straightforward from this point out for these open years, but I'd like to operate without surprises. now that the national picture has stopped surprising us, really we should.
I think that would be, I think that would be very, very wise, Chair. And what we could probably just do at that point is also talk you through, what the form of the opinion will be and how we will reflect the work done to date in that opinion. Because I know that's been a question we've had from a number of organisations, and we're still awaiting some guidance from the FRC as to quite what the wording of that looks like. So that would give us an ideal opportunity to do that in advance.
Thank you. Unless I think we're done with that conversation, so I'll now open up to members of the committee, and I think Councillor Williams would like to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and your risk-averse nature is obviously something that comes from your career, I'm sure, about not wanting surprises, and I feel the same sentiment as yourself. I would ask that any findings from your meeting that you report back to the whole committee so that we can all be briefed of the situation. In my questions, a lot you'll have heard, or members from EY will have heard my questions earlier around your significant risk or significant weakness that's displayed at page 57. And I I wasn't quite clear from your introduction. Obviously, you've heard the response we were given earlier and the understanding. So this, even if the accounts are kept up to date, this still stands. Is that because you've looked at who's interim and who's not and who's sort of temporary? Is there something, because you go on in the rest of the report as well to say that you've made us aware about weaknesses and lack of resources for the fixed asset register, but I'm going to use the word that Mr. Tully used of seasoned. Some of us are seasoned members, aren't we, Councillor Howe? I liked that rather than being around since the ARC. But seasoned members will remember that we have repetitively supported, as a committee, across the board, more resources for the Finance Department time and time again. In fact, the previous chair of Audit and Corporate Governance was very committed to that, wasn't he? He was very forceful in his representations, quite rightly, because of the situation we were at the time. So, despite all of our efforts to get more resources, despite the finance team bringing in more resources, we still have this risk. So it feels a bit unnatural, if I'm honest, to still see that there, which is why I challenged it earlier. So what is it that this council would need to do for yourselves to be satisfied?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. It's a great question, and I think that we need to link this forward. Not to put Mr. Cardoza on the spot, but we do need to link this forward to his assessment in his plan, and some of the commentary that he's got in there as well. One of which sentence that stands out is that for 9 years the council has struggled to get its accounts out on time. So this is not an issue that has is just in the last few years, or was a one-off, and and then some significant improvement has taken place because of that investment. I think it's a lot of investment has gone in, more more posts have been opened. Quite a lot of those have been filled over the last 2 to 3 years, though, with interims, and I think it's only really stabilised probably in the last year. That would be my assessment, and Peter can correct me if I've got that wrong. So we're looking at up to the 31st March 23, when I think that was the point where some stabilisation started to occur, and we're commenting on the significant weakness up until that point. But I'm interested that the finance function has not made quite the move to improve the arrangements. We've still got reconciliations being identified as an ongoing issue within the KPMG report, and some other weaknesses that they've identified where in the control environment and the governance environment that needs to be improved. And it's, we talked about training, we talked about, capability in terms of the quality of people being recruited in, and the consistency of the team over a number of years to really understand what that control environment needed to look like, how it was affected, and then what the knowledge and understanding of the business is, so that then you've got people who are really able to pop out a set of accounts because they really understood both what the organisation is doing, the financial implications of that, and then the reporting implications of that in the different framework, which I know that you understand from your background. And that has been a really difficult journey, and I don't think that the organisation has quite got there yet. So whatever you can do to strengthen that team, that training, and that understanding of responsibility around the control environment across the organisation, I think is where the efforts still need to be focused.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on the specific point, Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Chair. And that's interesting to hear that response, because I say it does feel like, what more do you want from us? Because we keep trying and we keep pushing, and we do challenge as a committee, which is exactly what we are meant to do as Audit. Obviously, officers would have heard the response there, and I was looking to Mr. Tully for internal audit. If there's something you can take, we reference training. Seems to be the key to satisfaction here. If that could be incorporated, if we have some reassurance that it will be incorporated, because I've met with many members of the finance team on a regular basis, and they all very much do know their briefs and their jobs, and they're a very good team, and actually a very close-knit team. I think they ought to be really supported and in their works. And if that means that we need to do more from the outside of the organisation, and many of us, when we had a workshop back when Suresh, we had one which was internal audit, external audit. I can't remember, Chair, if it was pre or post you becoming Chair.
That would be pre, I think.
That was a really helpful exercise to enable councillors on audit committee, to enable officers, and maybe we should open that up to actually managers in other departments as well, to have that sort of workshop that we had before, and maybe that would help in more awareness across the council, because you know finance are working their socks off at the moment. So, so yeah, if Mr. Tully, could you take that on board, please?
Yes, noted.
Thank you, Mr. Tully.
Noted. Thank you.
I'll come to Mr. Howell. Sorry, Councillor Howell. I think you indicated you wanted to speak at this point. Yep. Good. I think this is a good moment.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm just aware that in the end we are a small council, and the fact that we have staff doing audit is great in one thing or another. But in the end, we can only put so many resources into looking audit and other aspects, scrutinising our work, when then it starts taking away from frontline services which we should be delivering. So I'm looking at this, at where do we see, or where does Ernest Young see the fact that we have to have a balance between scrutinising every single thing that we do and also delivering frontline services and not taking away from that? And I would like to know where that happy balance is. Thank you.
Is there somebody that would particularly like to comment on that? I mean, in a way, I don't know, Mr. Maddock, if you want to take a first swing at that as the kind of sort of the management responsibility for that balance.
So, I was going to comment on some of the things that Janet had said first. Yeah. So yes, it is 9 years. I did go back and have a look, and I think it's fair to say that particularly around the years 17, 18 and 18, 19, we had particular difficulties. And I think it's also fair to say that since then, things have been improving. I think it's also fair to say it's been quite a long road. And, the committee has been very supportive on the way, and EY, have assisted where they can. But, I think, I think we've still got a little, there's still steps to take. But given where we were several years ago, I think we have made a lot of good progress. The training referred to is in train. Sorry for the pun. But, the training, is ongoing. We've had a restructure in the finance team. We're now going to have a dedicated year-end coordinator who's part of our ongoing staff. That's currently a role that's been done by an agency colleague. So we are sort of and have set in place what we believe are the right arrangements to make sure that we get this right, get everything done on time. And a lot of the recommendations in the later report, I think, do go back to the fact that we've been behind with the accounts, and we've been trying to catch up. And I appreciate it has taken quite a long time, but given where we were, I think we've made significant progress over the intervening years. But I also take the point that for the years 21, 22, and 22, 23, neither of those sets of accounts were completed on time, but that was as a result of catching up on the years before. So it's all been sort of catching up. And even the last, the 23, 24, they were produced a month late, but again, that was still related to a knock-on from previous years. So I would anticipate for 24, 25, we would meet the deadline. And that would be, and now we've got, in my view, the right structure in place to achieve that. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't achieve that. But yeah, I know, I do recognise the fact that it's been a long, difficult road, and I do thank everybody for their support. But I think I probably agree with Janet. We're still not quite there. There's still that final step to take, and I'm confident we will make that final step over the next 6 months or so as we get through the 23-24 audit.
Thank you. I think that's sort of building a reasonably kind of consistent picture. I think we may perhaps disagree over some of the you know, there may be some disagreement over some of the sort of particular details and maybe even the kind of the absolute standard performance, but clearly the kind of relative trends I think we can all agree on, particularly, as you say, kind of the last kind of couple of years. Sorry, I wanted just to come back to Councillor Howell's question. This, no, that's quite all right. So this kind of relative balance. I mean, I know, you know, your team is expected both to, you know, do the significant work on the annual audit and the financial statements, but also you've got very key responsibilities around the medium-term financial strategy, the budget, and other kind of key pieces that, as Councillor Howell has referenced, really drive and support frontline services. So is there any comment you want to make on the balance that you're seeking to strike between those?
So I think one of the other problems with getting behind with the accounts, you end up supporting audits, doing accounts, not within the timescale, and it then clashes with things like budgets. Once you're up to date, things sort of work reasonably well on the basis that you're doing your final accounts audit in the summer. Once that's finished, you're starting on the budget. So actually, you know, once you're caught up with the accounts and things are going to the time scale that they should be, it actually works out quite well, and the balance between the two actually works quite well. When you get behind, it almost exacerbates the situation because you're trying to do accounts and audits when you're trying to do the budget, and that does create issues. And that is also, I think that's also part of the reason, possibly, why it's taken so long to catch up, because you're trying to balance all of these things all at the same time. But now that we're up to date, you know, we'll be able to do the audits, the accounts and the audits in the summer, early autumn, and then the budget obviously later autumn and the winter time. So, you know, once things are up to date, it does generally work quite well, and it should be working quite well, particularly with the restructure that we've done in accountancy and that Pisana has led. So,
thank you. Did you want to comment further on that, Councillor Howell?
No, it was more the other auditors I was more interested in our own view on this. Because, I mean, I think it's got to be acknowledged the fact that in the end, we've only got a limited amount of staff, and the fact that we are a small council. We might think we're very big, but we're not. In great scheme of things, we are a small council.
Thank you. Ms. Dawson.
I'm happy to respond on that. I think you're absolutely right. It's most difficult for the smaller councils because you are subject to the same regulation, the same expectation in terms of, you know, the finance function, the Section 151's responsibility for maintaining the control environment, for reporting out to the department on particular metrics and producing financial reporting to the standards set by you know, both SIPFA and then by central government. So it is difficult where you're a smaller organisation, but you're held to exactly the same standard as, for example, a unitary authority that may have a better funding position and you know, more capacity within the organisation as a whole. So I completely accept that. You know, there is a challenge back to SIPFA through all of this reset and recovery process that the MHCLG are undertaking to say, are the reporting requirements, you know, proportionate for all organisations within local government? Unfortunately, SIPFA they've had this question posed to them for the last 4 years, and you know, they are working on some sort of solution we gather over the next couple of years, which may lighten the burden on the financial reporting side. And then clearly we are held to account by the Financial Reporting Council in terms of the standard to which we perform our audit across any audit that we do in local government. So again, that's a heavy burden for the smaller organisations. So I think the reset and recovery process should address an element of that going forward, and certainly as auditors we are pushing for that to be done, to get a more proportionate reporting requirement on authorities, so that then the audit can also be more proportionate and hopefully reduce that burden. But as it stands at the moment, you're held to your regulatory requirements as we are, and it can be, you know, very demanding.
Thank you. That's a helpful comment. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Thank you. So we've been asked to note this report, which we have done so. Thank you very much to the two representatives from Ernst & Young for their time this morning. I look forward to catching up with you later in the autumn to sign off those remaining accounts. Thank you. So we've been going for nearly an hour. My suggestion would be to take items 7 and 8 while we're in the world of audits and account, and then maybe take a short comfort break before the excitements of government risk and control and the risk register and so on. Is that acceptable to members of the committee? Sorry, Mr. Cardozo. No, that's fine. Yes, if we could just sort Mr. Cardozo's microphone. While that's taking place, Mr. Maddock, would you like to present item 7, please?
Thank you, Chair. So just a brief update on where we are. We've probably done 21, 22 and 22, 23 as part of the EY report. Janet's helpfully given us a bit of an update on what is happening as regards those accounts. As I say, we're expecting, well, we know that the backstop date is the 13th of December, as previously said, and we're going through a process with EY providing information to them, and also at some point we will know what exactly the wording is within the disclaim, which at the moment we don't know. So as far as I'm concerned, that's all progressing as planned. I think it would be quite helpful to have a meeting perhaps in early November, as you suggest, so I'll be in contact with Mark to arrange something in and around that time so we can see where we are and take stock, and maybe by then we will know more about the disclaim and things like that, so which will be really quite helpful. As I said, the 23-24 accounts were published a month late, and they were approved at the last meeting. We have been reviewing the accounts, and as part of that review, 1 or 2 minor items have come to light which we are correcting. There's nothing that's material. So we're still just finishing up on that process. So within the next week, I would expect those accounts to be available for audit. I'll need to check on the exact progress with that, but that's where I think we will be with that. I've referenced on page 86 the recommendation that EY made in their report around assessing and flexing roles. I think we've probably covered that point earlier, so I don't think we need to cover that again. And as I say, we're heading for the 5th of December, hopefully, to have the 21-22, 22-23 process completed. Ahead of that, and hopefully we can finish everything off on the 5th of December, ahead of the backstop date of the 13th. I think with regard to 23-24, we're expecting the audit to start late October, early November. I don't think we have an exact date, do we? Yeah, or do we? All right, okay. So we're expecting that to go ahead. We obviously need to have everything done and dusted by the 28th of February, as Janet mentioned earlier. And I suspect that that'll mean that we'll need an additional meeting of this committee, because it doesn't fit in with our scheduled meeting. So we'll assess when we need that meeting, but my guess is that would be in February 2025 at some point, based on what I know at this stage. So I don't think there's anything else particularly to add at this stage. What we will do when we have our final set of accounts that we present for audit, we'll circulate it to members of this committee, just for their information. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm sure we can pick those up. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. Yes, and just to respond to the previous request, I will make sure that we circulate any outcomes from a meeting in November. I just wanted to convene a relatively small group rather than necessarily call a full meeting of the committee just to discuss that. In terms of the minor amendments you mentioned to the accounts that we approved, I'm happy that we don't bring those back to committee at this point because there may well be further changes as a result of the audit. So there's no point in having repeated sort of dragging it out every single time we change a couple of £1,000 here or there. But nevertheless, if you could circulate to members of the committee just a summary of those changes, just so that we're cited on them, and they won't be a surprise when they kind of inevitably emerge later down the process, I would appreciate that.
Yep.
Are there any further comments? We will move on to KPMG in 23-24 in a moment, but are there any comments at this stage? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small thing on paragraph 2 on page 85. For those of us that have, when we do reports, obviously we must think that they must be accessible to the public and what have you. Now, those of us that have sat on here for a while will instantly understand what that means. But perhaps the way it sort of blends in, it's been known for a while that there would not be a full audit of those years, rather wait for confirmation of the backstop. It might just be easy to put, I think there should be a comma or something in it, because it kind of, it doesn't quite flow. And yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but I think if from an accessibility point of view, if somebody was to look, and I say this because I know from parish councils, the accounts, because of the delays and what have you, it is something that they look at. So it might be worth just adding a little explanatory note. Is that right, Chair?
Yes.
Still very early for me.
Yeah, no. No problem. Yes, no. Thank you for those. Thank you for those comments. I think when, yes, I mean, ultimately, perhaps when sort of in December, when we do get the outstanding years signed off, whether we want to consider whether some kind of wider press release or communication would be in order to indicate the kind of the point that the council has now got to, in terms of, at that point we are more or less up to date, and certainly by February we're completely up to date. So whether we need to plan, as Councillor Williams has said, this has been of public interest, and whether some kind of forward communication plan, this might, now that we've got those backstop dates, whether we could actually start drawing up a plan for how we communicate to the wider public, because I agree, it's been confusing for us for the last 6 months, so goodness knows what it's been like for anyone else trying to follow along, as it were. Thank you.
Good idea.
Bemused, yeah, that's one word. Councillor Stobart.
Chair, a brief question, if I may. Paragraph 11, covers or is a comment on the discussion that we just had and explored in depth. And I think the presentation, particularly made by Mr. Maddock, is very clear. I think this getting back into synchronisation with the yearly pattern is very compelling. But I just wanted to ask, by way of perhaps helping to draw a line under this, is there any more this committee can do to help? Is there some support? To you, Chair, I think anything more we can do to make sure that these, quote, weaknesses are actually finally cleared up.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. I mean, Mr. Maddock, do you want to comment on that?
Something you probably need to think about. I mean, certainly I remember in the past we had a meeting of some of the committee members and EY previously, and I think that was really helpful. So certainly something to consider, because I can imagine that there might be something to. Can you let me? I'll think on it, and perhaps I could feed it into the meeting in November. We could report back.
That sounds very reasonable, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose my concern with this timeline is obviously, we're going to have a backstop date for the most recent year's accounts of the end of February. Off the top of my head, I want to say the budget and MTFS go to scrutiny in early January and then to council in February as well. Am I getting that? Have I got those dates right, roughly? So I'm just sort of wondering about how the congestion of key documents that you're going to be working on. I don't want to ruin Christmas, but it's looking
so,
a bit.
So yeah, it's a good point, because hopefully this is a final year we'll get this congestion, because we've got exactly the issue we've had before, where we're doing budgets at the same time as supporting an audit. So it will be quite congested. You're right, yeah. So the MTFS, we've agreed the initial MTFS at Cabinet 2 days ago. So there will be an update to that come as part of the budget process. The budget process is sort of kicking off now. I think we've sort of just started started the process, and that runs through the same time period as the audit will run. So there will be 1 or 2 pinch points which we might find difficult to manage. But having said that, you know, I think we had it with, was it 21? I think it was 21, 22. We had a similar situation where we were doing a set of accounts and budgets. So yeah, there might be something there around, you know, support from the committee during that process. But if you let me have a think, I'll come back on that. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we've got a little time now to kind of brace ourselves for what's coming, but not a huge amount. So we should make the best use of that. Are there any further comments on this report? No. So we've been asked to note this report, which we have done, and we'll move seamlessly on to item 8, which is the audit plan. This was published as a supplement to the agenda on the 24th of September. My apologies that you haven't had the normal length of time to read and digest it, but I understand that it has been looked at least by many, if not by all members of the committee, so I think we're reasonably well briefed on it. We're joined by Mr. Cardozo from KPMG, who will now present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and again, apologies from me as well in terms of the lateness with which you got the report. We were trying to work to get it as complete as possible so you didn't have too many gaps in it. So we were working right till the end of Thursday to make sure that you had that. But hopefully you had some time to review it and look at it and read through it. But I will take you through it in a bit more detail than I otherwise would, in terms of I won't just say that I'll take it as read. So just on page, so I'll use the page numbers that we have in our report. So the introduction page, you'll see Jess Townsend has been added in as one of the members of the team. That's because Debbie Stokes, the senior manager, is actually retiring from KPMG, which is sad for us. Great news for her. But we have brought Jess Townsend in, who is one of our stars within the local government audit team. So again, seamless introduction from our point of view to Fazana, to Peter and James and the team in accounts, and should flow through seamlessly because we've still got quite a lot of handover time with Debbie. So we've got about 4 or 5 months where Debbie will be handing over the reins to Jess. So they're working together on that. On the next page, on the overview of planned scope, including materiality of our report, nothing's changed there in terms of materiality from the report I brought to yourselves back in May. So that highlighted at that point that materiality was 1.94 million at 1.5% of expenditure. So lower than we would normally have at a standard audit where we know you, we know the accounts, etc. Would sit at about 2%. Lowered it to 1.5% as we get to know you, as we get to know the systems, etc. That said, anything over, because in 1.94 is still a large amount of money, so that said, anything over £97,000 we will bring to members and we'll share that information with you if any changes. Next couple of pages haven't changed. The significant risks on page 5 with a little graphic. Valuation of land and buildings, as I explained back in May, it's a very large number. It includes estimates and valuation bases by your valuers, so something that we want to look at. And again, because as EY explained and Janet explained, it has been a while since you've had an opinion on a financial statement, on your financial statements. So again, a large number that has not been fully audited, so something that we want to look at in detail. Valuation of investment property, again, a huge number in your accounts, and again, something that is based on making sure that the fair value that you value that is correct. And again, something that we're using some of our KPMG specialists to look at. Management override controls, again, as I explained in May, this is a standard risk that we have in every single audit plan across every single organisation we work with. Management are in a unique position to manipulate the accounts, so we as professional skeptics have to make sure that we look at that. Not that there's a specific issue here at South Cambridge. Valuation of post-retirement benefit obligations, again, something that's coming through in a number of plans that we have. Again, a large number based on assumptions from your actuaries, so we've got our actuaries looking at that as well. Expenditure recognition, and again, this is about the fraud implications of manipulating the accounts, having large accruals, etc. So again, we program our audit to look at that particular risk in some detail. As we've discussed, the other risks here, and I'll come back to some of that in detail. The preparation of the group accounts, again, we've seen some issues with that. We've obviously got issues with the opening balances because you've not had signed accounts for 21, 22, 22, 23. So those opening balances which come in, which we would normally take as read because they've been signed off by the previous auditors, we can't do that. So we're having to do more work on that. And as Janet explained from EY, the government is looking at that and looking at what work they expect from us as the incoming auditors. But again, we've got our own working group looking at that and looking at which balances we can take as part of our audit, so debtors, creditors, the balances that we will audit anyway. But the opening balances for valuation of land and buildings, for example, if you've not had that valued and you've only valued 20% or 40%, then the other 60 or 80% haven't been valued, so we have to take a view on that. And then looking at the recoverability and the accuracy of investments, and again, we'll come back to that in terms of the additional work that we expect from your accountants. At the bottom there, which previously said that it was ongoing work on value for money, we've now completed that, and we'll come back to that on page 20. The next few pages takes you through the detail, which I just talked about. So again, it's just on the next one, for example, on valuation of land and buildings, just on the left-hand side, the second paragraph, just explains the risk of the carrying value of assets not valued in year differs materially from what you have and what you've recorded. So that's why we look at that and why we need to look at that. And similarly on the next few pages as you go through, it just talks about the risk and talks about what we're going to do as auditors to mitigate that risk and to look through and confirm from an audit point of view whether or not your accounts are accurately and reflect the values that it should. So skipping forward, on page 11 of our report, again, the opening balance, just to reiterate, there is a lot of work that has to be done in terms of the opening balances, which we wouldn't normally have to do, but as Janet and EY explained, because the 22-23 accounts that come across haven't been signed off, then we have to take the balances that come into 23-24 and we have to do a significant amount of work on that. And again, we're waiting for that final guidance to come through from the NAO and the FRC. On the next page, on page 11, the preparation of group accounts, you can see that, again, as we talked about, the number of years that haven't been published on time, and equally, as Peter said, for 23-24, it was a month late. It has had an impact. All of this is about building back that assurance, back to yourselves as those charged with governance, and back to the people, the residents of South Cambridgeshire, who see your accounts and certainly taken on board the question in terms of the balance between how much time you spend auditing, how much time you spend producing the accounts, and how much money you have to spend on frontline. You do need that objective kind of assessment by external audit to give you, as those charged with governance, and your residents, the comfort and knowledge that those accounts are accurate and reflect the money that you've spent. Until you have that kind of confidence, it's very hard to say that what you're spending at the front line is actually what you've spent. So how do you know that it's actually correct? I know Peter and his team have worked hard, and I certainly would talk about Fazana since we've been here. We've seen a huge amount of work that they've put through. There's still a lot to do, however, from our point of view. Janet pointed out, in terms of from EY, pointed out the journey that you've been on, and certainly Peter talked about it in terms of the 9 years and the significant issues you've had in the past. Notwithstanding that, I still expect a really good quality first draft. I really expect the accountants to be on top of what they're doing, and I expect the controls to be working. That's my job. If we don't see that, then we will report back to you, and that's what we're doing here. Sorry, and then on page 13, the recoverability and accuracy of investments. And again, for the past 2 financial periods, it has been noted that not all investments have been appropriately disclosed within the financial statements. So again, as we were going through it, we noticed some omissions. So again, we're working with the accountants to make sure that is properly reflected and fully reflected in the accounts. And certainly in terms of some of the subsidiaries and the partnerships you have. So again, it's about making sure that they are accurate, they are complete, and they reflect the work that the council has done and the money that you spent. Just come back. And then on page 20, as I said, on page 20, this is the summary of the risk assessment on our value for money. So this is the piece that was missing when we brought our report to you back in May. It is a significant amount of work, a huge amount of work that has to be completed by the accountants in terms of the management questionnaire that we provided them to complete and all the information gathering that they have to do for that. There is a bonus in terms of once you've done it, rolling that forward, and then it's just about changing and updating the information that's been provided to us. There is a bonus for the council because you have all of that information in one place. You have all of the policies, you know when those policies are due, you know when the strategies have to be updated, etc. So I think there is, notwithstanding a huge amount of work that had to be done to get that completed for us, post that, there is a bonus back to the council. So we've completed that, and this risk assessment is 70%, there or thereabouts, in terms of our value for money work. So again, it's a big part of our work. Once we've done it, it's there, and then we can move on in terms of the actual final assessments. The table there on the left-hand side, so again, as Janet explained, there's the 3 criteria: financial sustainability, governance, and improving the 3's. And this is all about your arrangements. This isn't about whether or not you deliver value for money. So do we see a risk? We didn't see a risk in financial sustainability. You have strong, robust procedures there. And you're a financially sustainable council in terms of the money that you have. The MTFS shows that, and the reserves that you have. However, and then equally on improving the 3 E's, again, no significant issues or risks identified by KPMG. Governance, we did. And again, in terms of the same things that Janet and EY were reporting in terms of the accounts production, in terms of the controls that we expect to be in place, whilst you have lots of good governance in place and lots of things that work really well in terms of your scrutiny, in terms of the audit committee, etc., there is that piece about the production of the accounts. And it does take time. And the fact that you had a large number of interims in place, and you've now got a stable, much more stable team, we are seeing an improvement. The lateness by just 1 month is a significant improvement, but it's still late and something that has to be dealt with. So again, in terms of our assessment, you'll see that on page 23 and then 24. And then on the back of that, well, if I take you to the recommendations, which are on page 30. So again, in terms of the accounts preparation, as we talked about, a number of years unable to publish the accounts. The related party transaction, the group structure, the components identified, and again, as I said, some of the subsidiaries and the partnerships weren't included. Significant transactions may not be completely identified and reported in your group accounts. That's a major issue for me as your external auditor, so I need to make sure that they are correct. But we've worked well with Fazana and James and Peter to make sure that that is being updated, and certainly in terms of the improvements that we've seen in those financial statements from the first statement that we saw have been significant. But we do make the recommendation that there are clear roles and responsibilities assigned within finance with regards to the account preparation and deadlines and expectations, clearly articulated and monitored by senior management, and then by yourselves within audit committee. Full accountability has to be taken by all team members, so you can't, it's about seeing that ownership by everybody. That's what we want to see. And it has been accepted, and it's the management response on the right-hand side. It talks about the structure change and the inclusion of more generic roles, enabling service to maintain the flexibility. And there is that balance between producing your accounts, having them audited, and then having to do your day job, which is much more important from your point of view as members in terms of delivering the budget, managing the accounts, managing the money that you have, and the management accounts on a daily, monthly basis. But as Peter said, once you get back into that virtuous circle of you produce your accounts at the right time, you have them audited at the right time, you then get on with your budgeting, you then get on with your management of the actual council. But we have to get there, and we're working hard to make sure that we have the right team in place. We've done the right work up front, and the planning and risk assessment took much longer at South Cambridge than I expected. And again, part of that was about just people getting used to what auditors were asking, why we were asking it, and what we needed, because it's been a while. But again, we're getting there, and I see positive kind of results as part of our work that we've been doing with the council. The next one is about self-authorization of journals, and again, this is about The segregation of duties, this is about making sure that you have the right controls in place. And again, some of this has just fallen away because you've been busy, you've had lots of things going on. And again, sometimes being able to look at what controls need to be in place and making sure those controls work. Again, something that finance have recognised and accepted in terms of the recommendation. The next page talks about the accounts preparation again, so I won't go through that again. Sorry, I mean, in terms of the non-PO invoice and the self-approval, that again, we saw some control deficiencies there, and again, we recommend a formal, robust approval process, again, accepted by management, and again, something that will be put right. And again, that all gives us better comfort and better, from my point of view, a better control environment from which the accounts are being produced. So again, why we make these recommendations. Again, the control account reconciliations, and again, one of the things that I think Councillor Williams referred to in terms of the fixed asset register needing to be regularly reviewed, making sure that it's up to date, as on an annual basis as a minimum. You cannot leave it for years. The documentation of key processes, and again, there are significant financial business processes that operate within a council of your size. You're a significant organisation with significant money being spent. You need to have those processes documented. You cannot expect that everyone knows everything, but you cannot either expect that when something new comes in, that they know how to operate that. You have to have those processes documented, just in case the London Omnibus kind of issue. Omission of investments, I talked about this in terms of, there were some of the investments that we expected to see in the accounts because we knew you had subsidies, we knew you had partnerships, we didn't see them. Those are being looked at by management, and the introduction of those into the accounts is now being taken. And certainly in terms of having a formal assets and liabilities register, something that is part of our recommendation that comes standard as part of the questionnaire that we ask. Again, once you've got that in place, and it takes time to get that in place, you've always got that, and it's something that's really powerful to make sure that you've got the right assets. You know which assets you had, and you know what liabilities you have going forward. That was it in terms of the kind of VFM and our recommendations. It is important on the next page to talk about fees. Two things that weren't included in the scale fee that the PSA issued to yourselves was 315R, which talks about, again, the kind of risk assessment work that we have to do, and 240, which is about the fraud. Previously, that was a TBC in the plan. We've been through that now, and it's 14,000 for 315 and 6,000 for 240, something that I've discussed with Peter. The other thing we discussed at the last audit committee was some of the delays and the overruns that we've actually incurred already. The first one was 29,000, and the second one, which we know the additional work we have to do, we haven't quite done it yet, but again, I'll bring it to yourselves so that you know where we are, and that's 30,000. The additional overruns of TBC, again, that's because of the opening balances. We know we're going to have to do some work on that because the 22-23 hasn't been signed off. We don't know how much work that is, but when we do, and as soon as we do, we'll report that back to yourselves. And that was it, apart from, obviously, the confirmation of independence. Again, it's important for you to know that my team can carry out their work unfettered, with no issues in terms of impairing our ability to undertake our audit. And we've worked well with the accountants, had some robust conversations and discussions, obviously, as you can imagine. And it's a change of auditor, it's a change of how we look at things. Equally, it's not helped by the fact of the disclaimed audits coming forward from previous years and the lack of audit from previous years. But again, we're working through that. We're on and we're booked in to do the audit from October, and we're again hoping to get 90% of the audit done by the end of December. The 10% that's left is the kind of elephant in the room, or the EY in the room, in terms of when do they sign off the 21, 22, 22, 23? What does that opinion look like? What comfort does that give me or not? And then what extra work do I have to do as KPMG, as your new external auditors for 23, 24? That said then, going forward, we should be in a really good position if we are at 90% ready to sign, because that final 10% shouldn't take us too long to do. And we should be back, as Peter said, back on some form of common trajectory is for all councils going forward for 24-25. Thank you very much, and apologies again for the lateness. Hopefully taking you through that in a bit more detail helped put some flesh on that.
No, well, thank you for that, that very comprehensive overview. We obviously wish Ms Stokes a very happy retirement. Sorry that she won't have the joys of working on our accounts for years to come, but I'm sure she'll find something perhaps more fun to entertain her in the years ahead. Yeah, so pass that on to her. Before I open to members of the committee, I wonder perhaps I might just provide Mr Maddock with an opportunity to just provide some of the kind of management response to some of the issues that the auditors have raised, and then I will open up to the committee. Thank you, Mr Maddock.
Thank you. So I'm not sure there's too much more I want to add to what we've already said in the report. As I say, as we were saying, the first one obviously relates to the accounts. Actually, I'm on the wrong page. It might help if I'm on the right page to start with. So the first one obviously relates to the accounts, and you know, I think we have made good progress, and I mentioned that earlier. I think the self-authorisation of journals, Designer will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our system doesn't actually currently allow that, but that's something we're looking at. So it's something we'll either introduce into our finance system, or we may have to have some other process. But interestingly, I think our previous authority had a similar issue, and we had to do some amendments to the system. So I think this is something we can deal with in the fullness of time. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not sure I've got much to say on the PO, non-PO invoice self-approval. I think we do need perhaps to look at that process and make sure that it does meet KPMG's expectations. It may be that we need a further discussion on that once we've had a look at that. Control account reconciliations. I mean, the fixed asset register reconciliations, yes, they were done late. And again, that was as a result of being behind with the accounts. Once the accounts are being produced in a timely fashion, then obviously the asset register reconciliation will be part of that. I think other than that, yeah. So we'll look at our key processes. I think there are probably a number of processes, some of the more complex processes that we probably do need to look at and produce some documentation around. And it's a fair point, you know, if suddenly to the two people that are involved in it leave the authority, you know, and somebody new picks it up, then, you know, potentially you might have an issue if you haven't got these sort of notes in place. So that's something we'll look at. And actually, you know, it's interesting, I was thinking about this point earlier because that's exactly what happened when the accounts went wrong. Key people left the authority. There was no process notes or anything around that, and that was one of the real big issues that put us back to where we were. So, and then with item 6, I think the comment there, having a further discussion with KPMG would be helpful just to flesh that one out a bit. But I think the recommendations generally fair. I think, you know, there is work to do on some of these, and hopefully now that we've got a team in place and that can deal with this, then, you know, we can crack on with some of these and get these sorted sooner rather than later.
Thank you. And I think, as previously noted, I think that there's a bit of work for perhaps someone from Mr. Tully's team maybe just to assist and give the committee some assurance as to the changes that we go ahead and make. I mean, I think particularly, you know, with the journals, whether, you know, if it's not presently permitted within the system, I would have thought a reasonable interim control would be a regular review of journals on a kind of monthly basis by senior management within the team, particularly as it's not money. It's not money going out the door, as it were. It's money being moved around within our own accounts. But nevertheless, some kind of monthly review could, I suppose, take the place of a kind of system authorization, at least as an interim measure. But yes, I think I probably would expect some segregation to be introduced into the purchase order approval. Although I do appreciate the points that you've raised, that that it's very that what happens is very well documented. I guess there is just a kind of a sort of bypassing of the system concern. I think is what is perhaps what KPMG is bringing to this particular this particular issue and the account reconciliations as you've noted. I'll open this up now to members of the committee. Councillor Williams, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions for auditors and then of our officers. So perhaps I start with the auditors first, have a pause, and then the officers' questions. So first of all, it was just on page. So I've got our pages. Yeah. So our page 7, which I think is your page 5, is we get into the number crisis again. It says about the valuation of investment property, and one thing that we have had a big issue with in the past is actually because we're reliant on third parties to value the properties. So is there any sort of safeguards around that and the delays being held up? Because I think there was a particular problem with some of our assets that they could only be from a certain valuer, and there was like only 2 of them in the county or something at that point. So that's the first thing. On page 12, you refer to a lot of the retrospective work that will need to be done because the accounts aren't being sort of audited in the normal style. Now, I'm just wondering how much extra time the first audit will take, because we want to catch up. So how much extra time is that perceived to take? Because part of the proposal was to draw a line so then people could catch up and it would go back into the norm. Whereas from your report, I'm kind of, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like there's still retrospective work going to be happening. So if we could have some sort of quantity on that, because I'm concerned that the retrospective work will then trigger more delays and then we'll just continue to end up in this vicious cycle. And as Janet says, we don't want to end up on a list anywhere. On page 22, it's just a small thing about terminology. So, you know, as an audit committee, which we're part of the governance, our job is to challenge. You know, it's our job to ask questions and to challenge. But it's sort of been done as a negative in the way that it says due to the challenging governance, as if we were doing our jobs wrong, and in challenging. So I appreciate what it might be the complexity of governance, or governance rich, as we like to be called in Cambridgeshire. But I thought the word challenging kind of suggested that by doing our job, we were a risk. Just when you came to us in May, I assured you that we do read reports as a committee. And so I'm going to pick up on the same typo as I did back in May. And it's on your diagram with veil for money. I do believe it could be value for money. And I just thought it would be a good reminder that we do read reports, and that should hopefully satisfy some form of governance risks that you know members are reading reports. I have some other questions for officers, Chair, but I'm happy to take the auditor's response before I go on to those.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Cardoza, yeah, I would also be particularly interested in this view as to the retrospective work, because I think, to the extent that you're able to at this point in time.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Williams, and I promise we'll fix that one this time on page 29 of our report in terms of value for money. The first question you asked about valuation, on both land and buildings and on investment properties, you use a third party. One of the things that we will do as part of KPMG's work is use our own valuers who are RICS trained and qualified valuers who work across all of the organisations that we have that we audit across KPMG, including the FTSE 100 companies. So they will assess your valuers, look at the assumptions that they've used, look at the way that they've produced their reports, and look at how they've come to their decisions in terms of the valuation of your land and buildings and the investment properties. They will then provide that information back to me as to whether or not we can rely on it or whether we can't. We will also sample test some of that, the work that they've produced and some of your assets, to look at, again, in much more detail as to whether or not we agree with those valuations that they've come up with. There can be differences in terms of how our valuers look at things and how your valuers look at things. If they're materially within a range that I find acceptable, then I've got no problem with that. If they are materially different, which we have had at certain councils where a valuer has decided that a council's assets should be valued using indices from another region completely, because that was their assessment. That was wrong, because the council are told which indices you're supposed to use as a council by government, and those are the ones that have to be used, or you're hundreds of millions of pounds out, because these are huge numbers. So we had to qualify those accounts. I don't see that issue here. The conversations we've had to date haven't highlighted anything like that. However, there are large numbers, and we will get that comfort from our valuers. Hopefully that answers your question on that one. Ish. All right. But it is subjective. It is my decision at the end of the day in terms of whether or not I rely on the valuation that your valuers have given you. You have to employ a valuer to do that work. However, we have to take a view as to whether or not that's reflected accurately in the accounts. On page 20, your question was? Page 12.
How much time for the rest?
Oh, yeah, sorry. In terms of, again, without sounding trite at all, but it's a massive question. What the government have looked at, and the NAO have looked at, and the FRC have looked at, and have now fed back in terms of the backstop dates, they're talking about building back assurance. You as a council and many other councils have suffered by this backlog of accounts that have not been signed off. That backlog of accounts cannot be solved in 1 year. There's just no way. There's too much work to be done. There's too many unknowns in terms of the opening balances, in terms of what work has to be done. So what we've agreed as firms picking up the 23-24 and on accounts is that there's a period over which we will build back that assurance to give you, as those charged with governance, to give your residents in terms of what comfort they can get from the audit work that we do as your external auditors. That will take some time. Like I said, if we can get 90% of the audit done, that's a phenomenal place to be compared to where you were. But that doesn't give you the 100% that you would love in terms of year one. There's no way unless I redid the audit for 22-23, then we don't want to do that, and we won't get to that point, because as Janet pointed out, there is a backstop date for 22-23, which she and EY will live by in terms of the 13th of December, Friday the 13th. Someone had a sense of humour. But then for us, for 23-24, there's the 28th of February for 25. So 28th of February 25, if I've not signed your accounts, I will have to sign a disclaimed opinion. I do not want to get to that point. I want to sign an opinion, whether that's an opinion, and it will be an opinion, if everything else is fine in your accounts, 100% correct, except for the opening balances, which we can't take comfort from, it'll be an opinion with an except for paragraph. So everything is fine except for this, which is still a brilliant place to be compared to where you were, and in terms of the disclaimed opinion where no work was done in terms of your financial statements, or limited amount of work was done. Going on to 24-25 then, we've done 90% of your audit apart from the opening balances. Those will impact the comparator in 24-25. So again, 100% of your audit done, or 90% of your audit done, apart from the opening balance comparatives that come into 24-25. So again, 95% of the audit is done. So again, it will be a clean opinion except for 25-26 will be the first time when all of that is washed through, when I would be able to, or KPMG will be able to give you a clean opinion, if everything's fine with the accounts. Always have to add that as a KPMG audit, so there's a caveat. But if everything's fine with your accounts, that would be the first time you would get a clean opinion. That in terms of building back the assurance, is the process that would be followed through. In terms of how quickly we can get there, the fact that we're here, we've got a full plan that we've reported to you. We've got the dates agreed with Fazana, James and Peter and his team in terms of when my team is going to be here. Some of that time will actually be on site. Again, one of the things that you asked about, because again, you get much more done when you see the whites of people's eyes, either our eyes or the accountant's eyes. But equally, some of that will be done remotely because we use a team in India. Oh, bless you. But if 90% of the audit is done this side of Christmas, that is a great place to be. I know it doesn't give you the 100% that you want or would like, but we can't get there because of the opening balance issues.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think happily to change that in terms of due to the levels of scrutiny or the comprehensive governance. Yeah, no, that's fine. I can change that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Further comments or questions from members of the committee, please, for Mr. Cardoza. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Williams. So you did, yes. Your question.
Could you forget me, Chair? So these ones are more towards officers, but obviously if there's something that P&G want to contribute, then feel free. One about actually great minds think alike. I've also made a flag of the self-authorisation of journals because that does feel like a bit of a risk. And I'm just wondering whether there's any capacity issues or process issues. It sounds from what you've said before, it's process issues rather than a capacity issue. So if there's anything you want to expand on that, please do. Page 35 is to do with the fees.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've already getting an overrun and a delay, and so I completely agree that the progress is really happening, but it still feels painful to see money going out of our funds because of delays and overruns. So I see we've got a budget for more overruns, but how are we going to stop this? With the greatest respect, how are we going to get to a situation where the only money we give away is what we have to give away to the auditors? That's not trying to stop you earning a living, but just for the taxpayer, I would love, because that is just feels like such a waste of money that could be spent on other things every year. And I've seen a lot of those over the years. So please give me some good news, Peter, about how we're going to stop filling our auditors' pockets. And also, the last thing about the process working documents, because it sounds to me as if there's no recording of what people do in their jobs. I remember, from family, it's like accountancy, it's a family trade, both my parents are, and when I worked for my dad, the first thing he did when I started was got me to make documents. I had to screen grab every single step of the process I was doing. That was the first thing. And then afterwards, I sort of said, Dad, why have you made me do this? He's like, so I can sack you. So that was really, really comforting for me, but actually a really important point. And when, for example, I had to have my daughter 2 months early, so I wasn't due to go on maternity leave for ages, those documents were actually quite handy, and I'd just like to confirm that my father never sacked me. But it is, I sort of make light of it, but it is a really important process, and I appreciate that when other things are going on, it feels like, oh, it's always a tomorrow job, it's always something that can be done, but actually if we don't have that, every single person in this organisation really should have some, process working documents so that anybody else in that emergency could pick up the job, not necessarily do it as well as them in the way that they would analyse, but at least those day-to-day practices. Nobody is not replaceable, as they say.
Thank you. Yes. Do you want to provide any further comments on those matters, Mr. Maddock?
Certainly, I mean, the fixed asset register is one that I think we definitely need some processes in. It's a pretty complex system. We have got we've got a number of people who can work with the system, but there's always a risk that somebody goes sick and somebody's on holiday or whatever. And I think, that's a key system. It's highly complex. We need some process notes for that. So I think that's a must. We'll look at there are other processes which maybe we don't need such detailed notes. I think it's something we probably need to look at, but certainly the asset register is one that springs to mind that I think is key, that we have some clear process notes because of the complexity of that system. And certainly the Infosana and the team will be working on looking and in my view we do the most important complex ones first and gradually work our way through them. I don't know how long that'll take, but I think that's fair. On the fees, I suppose the good news potentially, although I don't know for certain, is that for 21-22 and 22-23, I'd like to think we won't be spending a massive amount of money, given that we're going through the disclaim process. I don't know what is going to be the size, you know, whether it's going to be the scale fee will be applicable or what really at this stage, and I don't know that anybody knows, do they? Certainly I don't know, but you know, I can't imagine we'll be spending as much in 21-22 and 22-23 as we did previously. I don't know whether Mark has any comment to make on this. Oh, he's gone. Oh, okay.
Apologies, I kept pressing the same button repeatedly. Sorry, I can just come in on the fees. So I think Peter's correct. We still don't know the exact mechanism by which PSAA will look to remunerate, obviously, auditors for that work, but clearly it's not going to be to the same level as you will have seen previously with audit fees. The PSAA, I know, are working through that as we speak, now that the legislation is available. And I guess there'll be two elements to the fee. There's the work we've done on value for money, which every body is having work on value for money on, and then there's an element of the fee for actually doing the disclaim work. So they are working through that at the moment, and until they have opined on what those fees and that fee structure should look like, as Peter says, we don't know what the answer is at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
So just to carry on from there, I think for 23-24, there have been some delays, and again, it's partly going back to the 21-22, 22-23 and everything else. But I'm not expecting the additional fee there to be at the same level as we were seeing some years through. But when we get to 24-25, we'll have got through, because some of the work that KPMG have obviously done this year is one-off work because they're new, they need to find out about authority. So I think Andrew might have mentioned this earlier, that, you know, some of the work they've already done stands in good stead, and it's just a case of updating. So there won't be all of that work. I'm not sure the scale fee takes all of that into account in reality, which is a bit of an issue, I think, you know, because when a new auditor comes in, by definition, there's going to be more work than there would be if they were in year 3. So, you know, the scale fee doesn't appear to take that into account. But I'm sort of confident that when we get to 24-25, we'll be back on a more even keel. But what I can also say is that the scale fee that we've had in the past is going to be significantly more, and it's in the document there, because it was around about 40,000, I think, in previous years, which I think both local authorities and auditors were of the view was wholly inadequate. And I think the fee that we have now looks a bit more in line with the expectations, you know, the work that the auditors have got to do. I can't really say much more than that at this stage. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cutler.
Just briefly, again, and wholly understand the challenge that you would rightly place on us in terms of the additional fees. The thing that I can provide you with some comfort on, hopefully, is that we provided a detailed breakdown to Peter. So hopefully, if those things are dealt with, and they are things that are fixable in terms of what we were asking and why we had to ask and what extra work we had to do, then going forward into 24-25, just as Peter said, then that shouldn't be repeated. If it is, then obviously there's an issue, but and we'll charge you again. but I don't want to get into that position, because honestly, I know it seems like this is about making money, but it's for me, this is about wanting to audit local government, and always wanting to audit local government. It's what I do. It's not purely for the, obviously we're a profit-making company, but it's not for the money. It's because I enjoy working in local government and enjoy auditing local government. When we have to do extra work, that takes resources away from other audits. We only have a limited number of people, as in every organisation. So I have to negotiate to get that team and get the same team. And again, because we train up people who are very good, they are always in demand by other teams. So to actually get the same team, that takes a lot of effort and time and negotiating and everything else, which then takes away from other audits that I have to deliver or other auditors have to deliver. So this is not in my interest. I promise you, this is not in my interest to do extra work. We have a fee that we've agreed with yourselves, with the PSAA, to do an audit, a standard audit. And that there's certain expectations from me, there's certain expectations from my team, but there's definite expectations from you as a council and your accountants to produce a draft set of accounts and working papers that reconcile to those accounts, and everything else, then all the controls that work from that. If we get that done, in theory, and again, I'll go back to when I first started as an auditor or a manager within KPMG, we could do a council of your size, we could do an audit within a month. I want to get back to that point. You want to get back to that point, because that allows you to get on with the business that you need to do, which is much more important than feeding a bunch of accountants and auditors. I promise you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think my sense is, as Mr. Maddock has indicated, that the change in scale fees gives us all a much more reasonable target to kind of aim for. I don't think perhaps the regime that was in place in previous years was ever terribly realistic, and that probably did lead to perhaps some kind of a slightly perhaps unhealthy and not as environment in terms of how everybody kind of makes it work and kind of makes it balance. So I do have more confidence in the new fee scale that's a reasonable target. And then I suppose the other point to pick up on is at the end of this audit, when we have a kind of wash-up period, which we should have about a month to do on the current kind of timetable. Well, we'll have to with the deadline that we've got. And that will be an obvious area that we look at, I think, in terms of learnings that we take forward into the next audit. Not exclusively just those that have cost us more money, of course, but that would be an obvious starting point when we're looking at that. Mr. Talley, do you want to briefly come in?
Thank you. So this is just going back to the point before the fees, but it's still very pertinent and relevant. Really sort of like 3 points I wanted to make where we can sort of like perhaps give the committee some assurance. So the question about the fixed asset register, we're doing, you asked a very good question earlier on about follow-up work. So we've already got that scheduled in our plan. So we'll certainly be looking at those sort of elements of that. The second point was at the previous committee meeting, the committee requested some supplementary work from internal audit around the statement of accounts. So the interesting challenge of that is really what to bring in scope. We need to be mindful, you made the point earlier on about the audit burden. You can, have a negative impact upon staff doing other key work. So we don't want to duplicate what colleagues at EY or KPMG are doing. We need to be adding value there. We've also got a little bit of sort of ethical considerations there, which I'm very lucky. All my team are qualified accountants. One of them used to be a very good external auditor, but we've been doing internal audit for a long time. So we wouldn't be able to provide exactly the same assurance as colleagues in external audit. And so, it's really about how we frame up that work. So I've been chatting to both Jess and Shania in the KPMG team. I understand you're waiting for further guidance from central government about what are we doing. You made the point earlier on, I think, about you've got your own internal sort of working group looking about that's good. So that'll be a help. Also started working on a brief with Peter, haven't I, about what we could consider and add value. And one of the good things about that was the control accounts you highlighted. I think we brought that to scope, just a little bit of foresight there. So that, along with the other actions there, we'll be picking those up. So I think hopefully that's 3 things, which kind of ties it all together, perhaps, and could be good assurance.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Right, I think we're now further comments or questions from members of the committee on the KPMG report, if we have any. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. That's been a very detailed and in-depth discussion of, one of the key things, if not the key thing, within the remit of this committee. So I do appreciate everyone's time and consideration. We were asked to note this report, presumably, yes, and we have done so at great length. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardoza, for coming in person today. We do appreciate seeing you, and we look forward to seeing your team on site next month. That's very exciting. In terms of the remaining business of the committee, I'm in yours, well, and indeed in officers' hands. We obviously have a choice whether we take a longer break and allow people to have lunch, or take a shorter break now and then get through the rest of the agenda and then sort of released more permanently. Does anybody want to express a strong opinion?
I would go strong cooking for a shorter break, as I have another meeting at 1. That's quite selfish of me.
Only gently selfish, and that's quite understandable. I'm looking for selfish comments really at this point. Officers, forgive me, I don't recall under what terms, whether I have to do I have to provide you with a lunch break at a particular time? I don't want to work you to death exactly, but
I think I'll go along with Councillor Williams, a short break and crack on.
Yeah, are we happy then? So shall I suggest a 10-minute? We'll take a 10-minute pause here. We'll resume at 12:05, and then hopefully aim to wrap things up. I would imagine between about 12:30 and 1:45. Is that acceptable to everyone? Good. Okay. So the meeting's adjourned for 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We resume this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee at agenda item 9, which is an update on governance, risk and control. Mr. Tully, would you be so kind as to present this report?
Thank you very much. So this is our sort of regular report on governance, risk and control, which we tend to bring to you quarterly. So we're starting off on page 91 of your agenda packs. Hopefully you always find this useful. Again, if you want to see anything else, do feedback to us at any point. Starting off with the internal audit updates on page 92, 2 reviews were concluded since we last met. The first one being carbon management data quality, which we gave full assurance. I think it's the 6th year reporting they've been doing it, and they're quite in the swing of it, probably not a proper auditing technical term, but yeah, we're getting a lot of positive assurance from them now. And the second one was grant assurance, changing places, which we also gave full assurance. It's worth noting that that was an improvement from when we previously reviewed it as an interim grant certification. So good positive steps there with how they were dealing with their project management. Moving on to page 94, we have our counter fraud updates, which is prepared by Tara, our fraud manager. I'd say just change in format is to be noted this time because the fraud team are currently migrating their data from their old system to their new system. And on that note, I think it's probably worth noting that they identified a cost-effective solution working with colleagues in IT for the migration of the data, which is very positive. Also in there's the fraud survey. It's a good innovative idea that this council's undertaken it. The feedback is there was a bit of a low take up on the first round, but they are looking at improving that with the second survey. And then finally, just onto page 96, the usual sort of topical updates for training, development and risk insight for the committee. 3 things to note, although the first one we've probably spoken about a fair bit already, the external audits backlog, but there's a link there to the sort of like central government website there. Also signposting you to introduction to AI with a focus on counter fraud, obviously a very topical, constantly developing and emerging area. So that's a useful reference point. And then finally, it's just good to recognise in terms of data transparency that we are sort of participating in the National Fraud Initiative. I did mention that in the audit plan earlier on, but it's worth just putting in the reports because every time we publicise it, it's good for information governance. So that's a simple report really, but happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Can I appreciate that Tara's not here today, but perhaps through you, Mr. Maddock, if we can, just looking at the results of this fraud survey, I mean, yeah, good to kind of run this kind of exercise and kind of improve our own kind of understanding of our own situation. I think, I suppose I'm a little concerned about the clearly a lack of uptake of notionally mandatory kind of fraud training. I wonder if that's something that you can take up with some of our HR colleagues, make sure it's included in all new staff induction, and also whether the system itself can generate reports as to who has or hasn't accessed the training and whether we need to do a bit of a push on that, because it is one of those areas of risk where, you know, the organisation is only as strong as the kind of weakest link in terms of gaining kind of privileged access to systems. So I think is that something you can take away and have a think about?
So yeah, there is a sort of mandatory fraud awareness training within sort of, I don't know what they call it, sort of, what do they call the bite-sized training, that's the word. However, Tara and the team are actually working on some more detailed training because I think she recognises the fact that the bite-sized training, while useful, probably isn't sufficient. So we're doing something in relation to that. We're also going to be doing a follow-up survey, which will hopefully improve the uptake. So I think, yeah, certainly on the training front, I've had a look at the initial training material that's being put together, and it does look a lot better than the mandatory one we've got. So we'll be rolling that out. And actually, it's probably something members would be helpful for members to perhaps.
Yes, I think. Yeah, so I think maybe when that's developed, if you can share that with the committee, I think sort of. I don't know whether we want to get ourselves onto the council training system or whether you just want to provide the materials, but I think providing that to members of the committee would be beneficial, and and I would then appreciate kind of an update to the future committee as to how we're monitoring uptake and how it's making sure that all new starters are kind of brought into the a kind of a culture of fraud awareness, because like I say it is insidious and something that we need to be aware of. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Just on the training side, I would like to say that I campaigned for a certain specific piece of training for years, and then it was done on the same day as a by-election for the council, at which point many councillors, including myself, couldn't go. And it was planned that would happen again, but it hasn't, and that by-election was some years ago now, so that means the training was. The only reason I raise it is because actually through the peer review, member training is one of the, member development is one of the things that was highlighted in the peer review, and we've been told that will be coming out sort of close to Christmas. And actually, when you say about the weakest links in the authority, councils are not weak links. We are democratically elected and great. Obviously, I don't want to offend any councillors, but we are the lay people in the room, and actually our training is, I think, just as important to the organisation as it is for the training of officers. And will you be feeding into that programme that's being developed in relation to member training and actually joint training, because that's a great opportunity. When we've done workshops together, we did one when I first became a councillor, it was about investment training. So long ago, Alex Collier was here. So that shows you how long ago it was. And we all were on tables in the chamber and had to come up with sort of ideas and look at risks and investment opportunities and all these sorts of things. So I think that the joint training between members and councillors, particularly in finance, it doesn't have to be, what people think of finance. Finance can be fun. Don't laugh, it can be, if you're a number nerd like me, maybe. But I think that is really important to just remember that we are a cog in the chain as well, and that then would actually be supportive of the report to make improvements following the peer review. I just had one other on page 95. I think you've got a slight typo. I feel like I have to be fair because I picked a typo up for the auditors on the last relevant training. I think I could be wrong, but that just doesn't quite look right to me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Mr. Tully, are you happy to take away those comments on member training, and in particular that session that we ran? I think it was, I want to say a year ago, but my mind is going by this point, so I will defer to others on the passage of time, but if we can make sure that's fed in specifically as well.
Yes, time flies when we're having fun. It was only last year, as reassurance. I know Peter and I have already started to prepare for that. We do need to get a date in the diary, but we'll have a programme to take the committee through,
Thank you. Councillor Stopart, please.
Chair, thank you. So it was a general question which was provoked by the internal audit update on carbon management, and the question is this: carbon management, and these comments could be applied perhaps to measurement of other things where the background is emerging quickly and assumptions made matter a great deal. Perhaps if I could just expand a little bit, the understanding of where carbon is generated, fossil fuels are used, other ways of perhaps capturing carbon are employed as well, is a complicated and developing area. So making assumptions about where carbon comes from and how it's accounted is complex. So how do we anticipate that in the way we as an organisation account? What standards do we adhere to, and what do we look out for in terms of developments, trends and kind of emerging standards? And I think the crucial thing here is that comparing like with like. So are we going to produce statements of carbon management that are actually comparable reliably with other organisations? So there's a kind of slightly rambling question. Now, the other thing that we might include in this as a specific is use of artificial intelligence or anything that makes heavy use of cloud computing, because, of course, there is a carbon cost associated with every time we access the cloud, and you know, generative AI is well known to be a big user of energy. That's a specific example, but the general question is around what assumptions are we making? Are we keeping our eyes open to the developments and adhering to standards where they exist?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good, insightful question around what we're essentially talking about is third-party sort of transactions further down the supply chain, which we might not be having direct influence over, or at least access to that data and information. I mean, in short, it's a very complicated question, which I don't have the answer for right now. And, you know, I'll probably go and have a chat with my auditor about it. And he's probably already had a sort of discussion with the team about it. In respect to the carbon data, but you're right, it does go on potentially into other areas as well when you're looking at the broader supply chain. Certainly, you know, you can only sort of report and sort of measure and control what data you have direct access to. And AI is a great example, I suppose, of that. I mean, I'm thinking out loud here is that perhaps some of the costs are borne through transactional on the price and how much they charge us to use AI and things like that. But that's not the actual sort of carbon data with it. So that has a sort of direct influence in some ways. Is it part of that reporting data set that helps you make decisions? So it's definitely an emerging, challenging area to grapple with. So, you know, that would be my sort of response on it. You're absolutely right. It's an interesting area, and I'll go and have a chat with my auditor about that specific element. Oh, one further thing. You raised a very good point. Like for like, that is a challenge. As we become better at measuring and learning new things, you're absolutely right. There's obviously, it makes it harder to compare it to previous years where you haven't had the same data or you've not recorded the same data. So that could mean that the baseline is potentially always changing. So you need to be reflecting that when you do the annual reports. So yeah, it's another good observation. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the committee on this report, please? No, so we've been asked to note this report, which we have done. Thank you very much, Mr. Tully. We come to agenda item 10, which is the strategic risk register. I believe we're joined by Mr. Ledger to present this report.
Good afternoon, committee. Yeah, hello. So just to jump straight in with this report, this is the 6-monthly strategic risk report that comes to Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. It provides an update in relation to risk monitoring and management activity that has taken place since the previous review at Audit Committee, which was in March. As well as a copy of the strategic risk log at Appendix A. A summary of the changes that have taken place is included in the report. And I think that's, I noticed kind of when producing the report this time around that list has extended in length slightly from last time. So although it might be a fairly kind of blunt indication, I feel like it's a good indication of the ongoing efforts that are taking place to ensure that records of our risks and control measures are being kept up to date. So as part of our strategic risk review arrangements, any suggested changes or updates that come forward from Audit and Corporate Governance Committee, once I pass back to the chair, will be reported back to the leadership team for consideration as to how those could or should be implemented into the risk log. And that's something that has taken place following the last couple of 6-monthly reviews. So that's everything that I really wanted to cover by way of introduction. So if I could just pass back to you, Chair, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that arise.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments that members wish to make on the risk register as we've been presented to it. I will change things up. I'm going to go to Councillor Stobart first, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Williams.
Chair, thank you. Perhaps a comment, which I'll turn to a question and just a straightforward question. So first is, you glance down the risk register and yeah, there are risks that you could say are hard and numerical. Each one, you know, has multiple dimensions. But if you look at, for example, 22 on page 106, you don't need to look it up. I mean, I'm just quoting it as an example. The development of the local plan, you know, great, of critical importance to, you know, the work of the council. But perhaps, you know, the formulation of the local plan is quite procedural. It requires a lot of attention to detail and the harnessing of, you know, the work of quite a lot of people. But if you then move along and it's down a few pages, number 20, which is partnerships. Yeah, it's partnerships across a wide range. A couple of examples there, combined authority in the health sector. So the approach to risk is going to be different, and perhaps that's reflected in the allocation of the risk to a member of the senior management team. But for example, partnering is quite cultural in a way. You know, this is about not just do we meet folk, but what's the spirit of the organisation around working with others, and that's going to go from investments all the way down to how do we develop good supplier relationships and so on. So I suppose the bigger question here is, do we capture that richness in the way we model risk? And is the ownership of risk, it would seem appropriate, but do we capture that kind of richness, if you will? And the second is around this thing, social value. And we did in scrutiny overview last time, looking at mobile warden services, review social value. Now, we haven't discussed it much at Audit, but social value comes into the risk equation in a way. You know, are you increasing or decreasing? You know, what's the impact of social value of a particular decision that we take? Often it's just financial, it's about pounds, but are there social value aspects to what we should be thinking about around risk?
Thank you very much for those comments. I think, Mr. Leader, I won't come back to you after each one unless you kind of wave frantically at me. I think this is an opportunity really for members of the committee to comment and then for those to be fed back as I've understand it. So I'll proceed on that basis. Councillor Williams, you wanted to comment as well.
Thank you. Two comments really. One was mainly around the MEARS contract, and if anybody was tuned into Cabinet, you'll know that what my main concern is that things MEARS subcontract sometimes. They need, which is, you know, fair enough, there's a particular skill that they need or trade, but that's still the main, for me personally, the main area of dissatisfaction that residents have, and I'm not quite sure in here how that subcontracting is reflected in the risk, and perhaps we ought to do some more around that. And I gave the example of a resident of mine who were left with a leaky roof for well over a year and was scaffolding outside their house because they could repair the roof, but there were solar panels on, which the council, and I think you were portfolio holder at the time, put solar panels on the roofs, which is a great thing, but they needed them to come in to take the panels off so then they could repair the roof, and which is a simple thing of coordination, but actually prolonged it. So just wondering whether there's any room to expand the risks of subcontracting and particular expertise that MEARS don't have. And then the other one for feedback was just in relation to page 107, and you've got the reference to the 4-day week. Now, the risk has been reduced. It says in relation to the independent report that verified the data. However, when you read the report in full, on the analysts, and that's paragraph 41, it says there are not sufficient end-of-year data points available to conduct a robust statistical analysis. So given that the independent report said they did not have the data to actually say that this was reliable. How are we squaring that circle, and is it right, sort of challenging whether it's right to then use that as a way to reduce the risk, because we also haven't had the response to the consultation, and I understand the risk is that people will be dissatisfied in the organisation, they have to go back to working 5 days a week. I completely understand that would be a risk there is a risk of upsetting some staff on that. But as we've not had the public consultation, and one would assume that if the public doesn't support it, then it wouldn't continue, how has that actually reduced risk? To me, the risk is exactly the same now as it was pre the report, and it will be until a decision of whether it becomes permanent comes into place. So I think we've jumped the gun a bit in reducing the risk, especially as the independent report said that there wasn't enough data. So for me, Chair, I think that should remain as it was, as a risk to the authority at that level, until a final decision has been made. But I'll say just a couple of points.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll ensure that those comments are sent back. I mean, I think to a large extent, this risk, more information about this risk is going to be available over the coming months, both from inside this organisation and indeed from national government, and that is what will really move the dial, I suppose, as to the risks of this authority.
Chair, if I can, just on the national government, I'm assuming that you're referring to the fact that they are more pro to the 4-day week.
Well, they may or may not be, we don't know at this point.
Well, they have said that they're pro to employees being able to ask, but it should be very clear, and this again doesn't touch on this, that is compressed hours, which is not what the authority is doing. So that in itself is something that's not reflected on here. It's sort of like a 4 or 5, and there's no reference to whether a medium position of compressed hours would come into play with the new government.
Thank you for that clarification. I mean, in any event, there's obviously not space here to discuss, either in the risk register or indeed in this committee, to discuss the full ins and outs and all of the different options. But we will ensure that your comments as to whether the risks have been prematurely reduced, we'll ensure those comments get passed back. Thank you for your reflections on that. Are there any further comments or questions from members of the committee on the report? I think if I can just close with one general point, I think it might be worth, between now and when we next review it, a somewhat detailed look as to whether actually some of these risks can now come off the register. There are some with very low residual scores, and it's quite a long list, and things where it seems like the majority of the potential actions have now been undertaken. And so whether this list could do with being pruned ever so slightly, just to focus our minds on those significant remaining risks, given, or I suppose alternatively, whether they can be relegated back down to more operational level risk registers, which I believe is the hierarchical process it's supposed to follow. But that would be one potential pushback. Yes, Councillor Stobart.
Chair, so I think we had talked about, and I'm not sure if it was in relation to this list, but possibly another list where after a period of time something can be removed. So you raised the question, what is the means by which, what is the judgment which is applied to remove something from the risk register? I think that's very important, because otherwise it expands endlessly or could expand endlessly, and there's no audit trail through why we removed it. And I think that's important to do.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Any final comments on the strategic risk register? No, thank you. We've been asked to review and comment, which we have done so. Thank you very much, Mr. Ledger, for presenting the report. We come now to item 11, which is the Treasury Management Performance Report for the first quarter of 24-25. Could I please ask Mr. Maddock to present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is for the first quarter of the year, so slightly out of date now, but this is the earliest meeting we could bring it to. So there's on page 113, there's a list of our current investments and also the loans, sorry, the investments we've made, and then further on we've got our borrowing activity on page 115. For some reason, some yellow still seems to be on the dashes there. I thought I'd take that off, but anyway. There's also on page 116, we've got some budget monitoring information. You'll see that our interest payments are probably going to be a bit higher than we thought, but equally our investment income will also be a bit higher than we thought, which is probably not massively surprising. They do tend to move in the same way. But overall, we're expecting, in relation to the investment type budgets, we're expecting a better outturn than we budgeted. There's also the usual commentary towards the end from our Treasury advisors, which is just an update on the sort of macroeconomics and things like that. So if there's any questions on this, I don't think there's anything particularly to draw attention to. Other than that, really, I suppose. Thanks.
Thank you. So just to clarify your comments as to the kind of outturn, so sort of, I should be looking at paragraph 31 there, which is showing, if I read that, an additional, we think an additional 1 million in income and about $500,000 in expenditure, so a kind of improved outturn of about $500,000, if I'm reading that correctly. Right. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on this report, please? Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I'm afraid I can't give you the page number because my laptop's died literally right in front of me. But it's in relation to the chart, I want to say 115, but that could be wrong, where it shows the maturity dates of our borrowing. And I think it's 40 million that is within a year. I'm just wondering if that is something that's due to be paid off, or is this refinance? We go into this cycle of sort of, obviously I tend to get, sorry, it really has just completely gone out on me. Is it 117? No, I think paragraph 17. Oh, I was close. On my. Thank you. There we go, 113. No. Next one.
Yeah, so I think paragraph 39, sorry, I'm looking at the individual paper, so page 117.
117, I did record it right.
So there is 40 million due to be repaid within the next 12 months, I believe.
Yes, because it's to do with, I remember the page numbers, so much of a number nerd am I, but we have a lot of emphasis on the fact that we have short-term borrowing and long-term borrowing, but the thing is, because we've had large sums of money that keep being refinanced, although it's classified as short-term borrowing, in reality it's long-term borrowing, and that sort of uncertainty of whether we're going to be able to refinance and not. So this 40 million, is this for paying off within the next 12 months, or are we due to refinance? And if so, are we sure that we can refinance such a large sum?
So it is due to be refinanced. Again, in anticipation that interest rates are going to go down, we've tried to avoid long-term borrowing because we'd end up with higher rates for a longer term. And also, some of the borrowing we've got, we do think we need it for, say, 4 to 5 years. So there's a mixture of loans there, but I think the 40,000, I'm expecting us to have to refinance that, yes.
Chair, if I may, so we've had that, and we've had actually Treasury Management, we had a conversation, we had a workshop with them at some point in relation, because I know we have been in this very strange situation in recent years where the interest rates for short term have been lower than long term. What worries me is that's a completely valid argument and reason for doing it that way round and keep refinancing, but there is a risk attached if we were there into a situation of we couldn't refinance it, or suddenly the balance changed. And it's all about risk appetite, isn't it? For some people, I obviously have a lower risk appetite than others, and that's a natural preference. But just how are we managing that risk and that refinancing risk? And it might be worth having our advisors back again at some point to go through that with them.
That's a good point, because we did have them in a couple of years ago, didn't we? I think.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So. Yeah. No, actually, that's probably not a bad shout because certainly the advice at the moment from them is still to go short term because of the reducing rates that we're seeing at the moment, and that has been their advice for quite some time. Because, as you say, we did have a period where short-term borrowing was significantly cheaper than long-term borrowing, certainly that's the strategy we're pursuing at the moment. That's the strategy we're advised to pursue. We meet with them on a quarterly basis and they'll update us on what they believe is the best strategy. I think we're due to catch up with them fairly shortly, so I'll put to them that perhaps we repeat the session that we did before, because I think, you know, it's useful for members to see the sort of things that they take into account, and we get quite a lot of sort of forward forecasting from them, and okay, you know, it is only forecast, but they've actually been pretty good at predicting what's happening with interest rates, and maybe it's not that surprising because I think we've always known that rates are going to come down, but they've generally been fairly accurate with predicting that. But I suppose that's our main sort of support, I guess. We don't solely rely on Link. We do speak to other organisations as well, but Link are our primary source of information and helping with our borrowing strategy. So I think perhaps if they came in and did another session with members, because I guess there's new members of the committee since that was last done, yeah. So that might have been in Tony's time actually.
No, I think we've had one. We've had one.
Okay,
We've had them at least once since then. Yes.
But yeah.
I suppose the only other thing to point to at this stage would also be the kind of short-term investments that the council is holding, which, you know, I suppose in the event of some kind of interest rate spike on the debt side of things, could be liquidated and used to offset our short-term loans. So
yeah.
So I suppose really we should be looking at the kind of net short-term position in terms of our exposure to a sudden interest rate shock or the equivalent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we have a lot of our investments. Well, some of our investments. We have got some longer term investments, obviously, with Ermine Street. And we obviously want to maintain that because that's providing a good income stream for our general fund. You know, if shocks did start to happen, we may have to consider that investment, and Ermine Street may have to go externally for their borrowing. We'd want to avoid that if at all possible, I think, because I'm not sure. They would probably end up paying a higher rate. But if we did start to see shocks, that would be something we might have to look at.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Thank you. It's just something that, so liquidity has been something that we've often had to, well, we had a bit of a situation, didn't we, which was COVID and everything else. So it's something that we've always kept a very close eye on. And I think in reference to your point, Chair, about being able to sell, I think the issue is we don't have as immediate access to funds as potentially some other organisations. So our ability to react in that situation it's a bit harder because our money tends to be wrapped up in, and obviously we get the precept setting, and so it's quite challenging, which is why it's so important we keep an eye on it. We did have the workshop under your chairmanship, but previously when we used to have some of the reports, the Treasury Management were actually here to take questions from committee at an audit meeting, and we haven't done that for very many years now. And I think the workshop and repeating that would be great because it's helpful for us, but also in being open with the public as well when these things come forward, because for us to go off and understand it is fantastic, but we also, you know, should have an obligation to. And then we did used to have probably about 6. It was when I first became a councillor, the first year or so, we did have people come in for committees, which was really supportive for us as well when we had questions, because it meant, and it also took the pressure off officers, because otherwise they would have to go away and find out things. I'm not suggesting we have them all the time, but it's probably due a bit of public airing, as it were.
Thank you. I mean, we could perhaps look, I'm thinking maybe the March committee date might be a good opportunity, simply because we will have, you know, the accounts will have done out of cycle, and so potentially that March meeting might be a good one to invite Link or our other advisors to attend. If that's
Yes, I'll make a note of that. I quite like that idea, I think, yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further? Yeah. Are there any further comments or questions from members of the committee on this report? Thank you. So we were asked to review the treasury management activity and performance and note it, and we have done so. So we turn to item 12, our substantial item, which is the annual local government ombudsman report. We are rejoined by Mr. Ledger to present this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this report presents the findings of the Local Government Ombudsman Annual Review Letter and the statistics contained within that for the year ending the 31st of March 2024. The general findings are that the number of complaints received by the Local Government Ombudsman about South Cambridge District Council reduced from 24 complaints in 2022 and 2023 to 11 in 23-24. So, and those 11 represent about 3% of the total complaints received by the council. So that indicates that quite a low proportion are going through stages 1 and 2 and then reaching the Ombudsman. So in particular, there was a reduction in complaints received by the LGO about planning and development. That's their heading rather than ours. And that reduced from a total of 14 in 2022-23 to 6 in 23-24. None of the complaints were received were upheld, compared with 5 in the previous year. So I think probably kind of on the whole, it's a fairly positive letter from the LGO this year. That's really everything that I wanted to kind of highlight from my part, but happy to take any questions or comments away.
Thank you very much. Yes, it did indeed appear to be a remarkably satisfactory letter and report. Any comments or questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I know the work that Heather Jones and others in the planning department to try and get those earlier resolutions so things don't need to go to the Ombudsman, as I know that they've worked really hard on that and they should be commended for that. Going through the report, when it comes to page 126, paragraph 5, which is the total amount of complaints, not the ones that have just gone to the Ombudsman, we don't have a comparison to the previous year, while we do have comparisons on the others. And I just think that would be really helpful to have, because we need to see are our level of complaints going down, or are our responses at the first point going down, if that makes sense. Which, like I say, when you look at the different processes and different efforts in the teams to resolve things earlier on when there's been conflict or requirement resolution, might not show us there. So if we could have the comparison figures for paragraph 5, I think that would be really helpful. And never shy away from a graph as well. We all love a graph. If you ever wish to put a graph into that. But yes, from the Ombudsman, it's a reduction. And we still need to learn lessons when things, but inevitably in any organisation, things are always going to go right and they're going to go wrong. That's the only guarantee. But it would be good to see those overall figures and go from there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Stobart, please.
Chair, thank you. So I was just looking at the letter from the Ombudsman. So there's a reference made to the complaint handling code, and the Ombudsman is urging the council to adopt the code without undue delay. So are we doing that? What are the implications? And secondly, I think the Housing Ombudsman Service is separate. And are we seeing any data coming through that channel? Forgive me if these are naive questions, but yeah, I'm just looking at this at the level of the letter. So, are we adopting the complaint handling code if we haven't already done so? And is there a parallel flow of, if you will, complaints and similar information coming through the Housing Ombudsman.
Thank you. Mr. Ledger, are you able to respond to any of those particular points?
Yeah, I think what I'd say is that I believe we are adopting the code. However, I'm not kind of very close to it at the moment. So probably the best thing for me to do would be to speak to Rachel Fox-Jackson, who coordinates our complaints handling across the organisation, and just get a written response to that, just to make sure that we're kind of setting out to you the correct facts about what we are doing to adopt the code and what that actually entails in practice. And also, sorry, the second point was about the Housing Ombudsman. I know that there was also a kind of an update to their guidance in the last kind of few months, and that's something that I know that Grace, who is our housing complaints coordinator, has been working with Rachel on to ensure that that is correctly represented within our overall complaints handling policy for the organisation, which covers complaints both in relation to the housing side of things, but also the everything else as well. So yes, and certainly I think that there's an attempt to try and make sure that we're consistent across the board, whilst also making sure that we meet those requirements of each individual of the two ombudsmen. And I would say also, I think the other kind of aspect of that question is whether the housing complaints are included within this. What I'll do is I'll go away and just double check and get an answer in relation to that, because I think that the housing complaints would be reported separately, so because they wouldn't be going to the local government ombudsman. So yeah, I'll find out more about that and get back to you.
Thank you. Did you wish to comment further?
No, Chair, that's fine. That's fine.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any further comments or questions from the committee on this letter? No, thank you. So we've been asked to review the letter and make comments as required, which we've done so. Thank you, Mr. Ledger, for presenting it and answering our questions. Finally, we come to item 13 on the agenda, which is matters of topical interest. Do any members or officers wish to raise any matters not previously covered in the meeting? No, that's fine. Well, thank you all very much for sticking with a slightly extended audit and corporate governance meeting today. I think we had some very useful discussions on quite a wide range of things. So thank you very much for your time. And I close this meeting at 12:52. Thank you very much.